Good evening, everyone. Happy to see you here at the debate tonight. Actually, the first English debate in English in the summer conference of the Montesquieu Institute. My name is Arco Timmermans. I'm research director of the Montesquieu Institute. The Montesquieu Institute is an inter-university center for the comparative study of parliamentary democracies in Europe. And this year, as in previous years, we have a summer conference in this time of the year. We are optimistic about the summer. That is about trust, politics and society, and in particular this year we highlight the major theme about reality and images. And so we thinking about an event for most of you, hopefully, the community of expats and others interested in and from The Hague, about a theme that would be interested is the question that is central tonight about the reputation of the Netherlands, whether the Netherlands as an outward-looking country still lives up to this image or whether there's something changing. And then the question whether that is something specific to the Netherlands in your experience and the experience of the panelists, or that is maybe a more global trend of which we are a witness. So my name is Arco Timmermans. I will moderate the discussion tonight. I would like to introduce you to the three panelists. First, Billy Allwood, who is actually, depending on the definition that you use, that's an issue perhaps, the politics of definition. But Billy Allwood is an expat living already in the Netherlands for 18 years. Some may know Billy already because he is the director and founder of TheHagueOnline, which is a website, a platform for the expat community in The Hague and around The Hague, organizing multiple activities. Billy moved to the Netherlands 18 years ago and has a degree in chemistry and a PhD in the field. Worked in different international companies, and in the past 8 years, slightly over 8 years, he is the owner and the director of the TheHagueOnline website with all its facilities. The second panelist today is Adriaan Schout, who is representing, if I may say so, the scientific world of the debate, although he has a position on the topic, and sometimes a position can be informed by values and our own images. Adriaan is Deputy Director on Research in the European unit of the Clingendael Institute, the Clingendael Institute, which is a well-known research institute. And in this quality, Adriaan Schout has published many articles recently in newspapers about this phenomenon, about how publics and governments in particular take position, how they profile themselves on issues, in particular issues of Europeanization and its contestation, which, as you know, in the current election campaign in the Netherlands is very topical. The third panelist today is Gideon Shimshon. He is the director of the very brand new founded Center for Innovation of Campus The Hague, the newest faculty of Leiden University, which will be opened in a week and a half in the center of The Hague. Gideon is a political economist and has worked as a consultant. And the three speakers will present a position on the central question of today, on which we will then have a debate. Now let me briefly summarize what we have in mind for the debate. There will be first time slots for each of the presenters to give their view and arguments about the central claim of today, the Netherlands, or the question of today, the Netherlands is becoming less of an outward-looking country. Is it true? Why is it true? Does it matter? Then there will be a new phenomenon in Dutch election campaigning, fact-checking. We will show you some graphs with information about what the Dutch public relative to other European countries, actually thinks about internationalization, the Dutch reputation, immigration, how the Dutch economy performs, a very topical issue in the newspapers of this week, so that we perhaps can add some information to the table to feed our debate. And then, talking about the debate, of course the floor is also for you to give your view, ask questions, bring topics to the discussion of tonight, so that we can actually really exchange ideas about this central problem on the table. And then we are now 20 to 7. In an hour and 15 minutes or so, we will have then a conclusion, and hopefully you will stay with us downstairs for some drinks to have an after talk as you like. Now, I'm happy to give the floor to the first presenter, Billy Allwood, to let me suggest that you take some 10 minutes for presenting your position. There is a microphone, or even two, I think, for the public, but let me suggest that we first listen to the presentations, and then there is space. There are mobile microphones by Peter and Leticia to help you to get your point. So Billy, please go ahead.
Well, good evening. As I said, my name is Billy Ward from TheHagueOnline. I had a look at the motion. As we know, the motion is the Dutch are losing their outward-looking reputation. And my view is that I think the Dutch are losing their outward-looking reputation. But I suppose how I started to look at the motion, I looked at what is actually the definition of outward-looking. And three items which include outward-looking are looking beyond oneself, open-mindedness, and reaching out to others. And I myself now been living in Holland, really in The Hague, for the last 18 years. And I believe that in the 18 years I've been living here, that the Dutch are less outward-looking, they look less beyond themselves, are less open-minded, and are not reaching out to others as much as in the past. And I think some of this comes through, I'm a child probably of the 60s and the 70s, when I would say for most people in the UK, I would say the Netherlands was considered one of the most liberal countries in the world, and I would say an example to other countries. If we look at sort of the first looking beyond ourselves, in the times I've been here, I'd like to give three examples, which I think illustrates how the Dutch have stopped looking outwards and more inwards. And the first is the inburgering. I don't know how many know, but this was introduced in 2005 in the Netherlands, and that means that foreigners, mainly from non-Western countries, have to take an exam comprising of, in parts, Dutch language and culture. And I think whilst I think a lot of people can say that knowing the language of your new country is important or very useful, I think it seemed, although an exception for that is expats, people like myself, I think one of the issues is defining Dutch culture. And for most of us, we used to think that Dutch had a very open culture and was very welcoming of new ideas. And one of the things, and especially when you see that now in the three largest cities in the Netherlands, over 50% of the inhabitants are non-Dutch nationals. And when you look a bit at the inburgering and what it says about Dutch culture, you tend to feel it's a Dutch culture which is of a predominantly white Dutch people living here in this country at the moment. And so you tend to feel, is that really the culture of the new Holland which is emerging at the moment? Yeah? So for me there's a trend that probably the Netherlands is looking back towards a so-called golden era. Also, I'll say in the last 10 years there's been a growth in, nationalistic right-wing parties in the Netherlands. You could say it began at the beginning of this millennium with, first with a party from Pimville Town, then you could say it's followed a bit by Rita Verdonk with Trots of the Netherlands, and now we have Geert Wilders with the Party for Freedom. And perhaps one of the sort of what these parties have in common is a mistrust of the Islam religion. So I think that also means that sort of yeah, we're not looking beyond. It is, I would say, an important religion in the world. And I think to be antagonistic to this religion, I think, isn't the way that the Netherlands should be moving forward. The other thing also where I think is not looking outwards is to do with the Dutch language. I'm an expat living in The Hague, where in one respect the local municipality here is actively promoting an international environment for businesses and for international organisations. And when I came here 18 years ago, I would say people were far more tolerant. I'd say myself expats with very little knowledge of Dutch. But I think I notice now a bubbling undercurrent that basically expats and all other, I would say, foreigners, there's more an expectation that they actually learn the Dutch language than before. So that's things in which the Dutch are not, I would say, looking more inward than beyond themselves. If we talk about open-mindedness, I would say that, as I said before, the Dutch were considered extremely open-mindedness. Coming from the UK, their drug laws. Now you could say, mainly due to happy tourists being too enthusiastic about taking advantage of the liberal drug laws here, they're seeking to increase the restrictions with regards to buying and using soft drugs. And in one way, it's a pity that you think that the Dutch now giving up the fight to get their neighbours actually to become more liberal, which I think is a pity. The other thing which I find in terms of open-mindedness is a big furore over dual nationality. I find it, for a so-called open-minded country to outlaw dual nationality, I find rather strange, especially in a time where we're becoming more and more multicultural. And I think to a lot of people, they do belong to more than one country. I know a lot of people, for instance, especially in the expat community, they could have a French father and an Italian mother, and their children are born in Holland. Yeah, what nationality are they? Is it that important? What is the big deal about being dual national? And also, so that's to do with the open-mindedness, and also I'd say with reaching out to others. I would say that sort of in terms of aid and charity, the Dutch have always actually been one of the most progressive in terms of aid and charity. And if you look over the last few years, the Dutch governments have been trying to reduce overseas aid. With regards to Europe, I think the Dutch are becoming more like the British in their attitude to Europe, which is what is in it for us. And it appears that they consider some of the Southern European neighbours not worthy of being members of, I would say, a wealthy and progressive Europe. And I think that's, I would say, is sad. And and it's not very open-minded, and it's also not reaching out to others. And I think that's also what has changed in the Netherlands. And also, I would say, another issue which is similar is immigration and asylum seekers. Over the years, the Dutch is trying to make it far more difficult for immigration, and I think especially for partners to come here and to live, and also for just in general immigration. However, I think that while I believe that the Dutch is becoming less outward-looking, I also think it's a European trend, and it also may be connected now with our current economic climate. Thank you.
Then Adriaan Schout, views from research perspective?
No, I will leave that up to you, because actually my research area is I'm an economist with a public administration background, and I'll bore you to death if I start talking about that. I think I have a bit of a hands-on experience, because I happen to be in a situation that at least some very small parts of the international press phone me when there's something about the Netherlands. And over the past few days, I hope you can hear me, I have, just today I think, I've spoken to the Express, Associated Press, Danish Press, BBC, and yesterday was the same, there's elections going on, and Somehow once they've got your phone number, they know how to find you. And I think this
Switch it off now, the phone.
yeah, well, they can hear me. I'll give them my phone number if they want. But the reason this happened is that 2 years ago or something, when Geert Wilders supported the government, I wrote a piece in the Volkskrant saying that Geert Wilders will do no damage to our economy because he just knows how far he can go. And I think I was pretty right. He hasn't damaged our economy. In fact, he supported one of the most pro-European governments that we've had. If you look at the measures they've supported over the past 2 years in the EU, it's been a very pro-European government supported by Geert Wilders. I once called him a salon anti-European because he talks a lot against Europe, but doesn't really do anything to stop any of that. So once I wrote that, and that attracted the media attention from Japan and the Philippines, and aren't you not mad in the Netherlands? And, this is now coming back again with the elections. There is a sort of international impression of the Netherlands that we are close-minded, that everybody here is dyeing his hair blonde and voting for Geert Wilders, and they know Pim Fortuyn, and that is a bit of an impression that I come across in my daily business. So, and I also know, sometimes even from close quarters, what the Dutch government is doing in the EU, because I'm actually, as Arco was saying, I'm regarded to be an EU expert at least. So I follow what happens in the EU, and I know Dutch positions, and I know what to do behind the scenes. And actually, this government is quite active, continuously, at the European level. Now, these may all things that you do not like what they do, but at least they're very, very active. And one of the things, what happened this week is that, I didn't see it myself, but there was a debate between party leaders, and if I'm correctly informed, Rutte took a very harsh position against Greece. Actually, something even with a red line, or I think a red line, no further money for Greece. This is the selfish Dutch interest. We don't want to support those problem countries. That's the impression. But I can tell you that Rutte is at his level talking to Hollande, to Rajoy, to Merkel, and they are talking about how to solve the crisis. And in this situation, Merkel and, for example, Rutte also, they are putting pressure on Hollande for when Samaras goes to Hollande, that at least Hollande is informed. You know your limits, you know your limits. You see in what position Rutte is. We have to wait for the report for the Troika. This is not a situation in which Rutte can say, we know we have to be flexible to the Greeks. Because if he says this now, the bargaining chip is gone, the pressure on Hollande. So the Netherlands is actually very much involved in all kinds of international debate, very, very deeply. And we have always been, as the Netherlands, a sort of intellectual leader country. The Dutch have always come with ideas, with analyses. The reason why, I won't make it technical, Schengen, the free the person movement in the EU, has been created in the way it is now, at a high level of European integration, is because the Dutch have been pushing it. Now we want to have certain changes. That is typically for the Netherlands. We think about things, we come with analysis, we have a sort of medium position in the EU. We're quite rich, we have a bit of an intellectual inclination, and we are not one of the big countries. We're not threatening. So we have this role and we can play it and we do it. And I still see that the Netherlands is doing that. Now, why we have this reputation? Of course we have Pim Fortuyn and Geert Wilders. But there are also these, let's call it incidents. I don't think there are incidents. We in the EU, even single-handedly using a veto, was 1 against 26. We blocked, for example, the accession of Serbia. Now, people say, this is what you do not do in Europe. But actually, it had a very big impact on the rule of law and the position of rule of law in all of the debates. And the rule of law is terribly important because it relates to media law, civil rights, and all the rest of it. The Dutch have defended it. And there was a lot of criticism on the Dutch doing it, but I can now see a lot of support for what good that you did it, because we actually now see how important rule of law in all these other countries is. Same with Schengen and the position in Romania and Bulgaria. Yes, we're the country which pulled up the handbrakes. And we hope it has effect, because we do it out of a certain reason. We have an intellectual explanation for it, and we're not afraid to say it. This is not an inward orientation of the Netherlands closing, and we don't want Serbia, and we do not want Bulgaria, Romania. This is because we have certain ambitions with the rule of law in the EU, and that's why we do it. Like it or not, I can go on with these things. So we have this reputation. I can clearly see that, but I also think it is not quite deserved internationally. And I can give many examples of why this may seem the case, but fundamentally the Netherlands is a very liberal and pragmatic country. We know where our interests are. 70% of our economic interests is related to the countries around us here in the EU. We know that that is the case, but we will not buy anything of Europe all the time. And we're also very liberal. We even require people to start learning Dutch, presumably these days. So we're very pragmatic. We've always been that, and we're not true fundamental Europeans believers. People think that we were, but we, look at the 50s and the 60s. The Dutch were always very pragmatic about why we wanted the EU. We haven't changed. We haven't become pro-European, and we haven't closed our mind. We're still the pragmatic Dutch trade people that we always were. Now, why have we deserved this? That is the question. I do not really know the answer. Why do people think that we have gone mad and closed our minds? And of course, I take all the things you said really as absolutely true. But not of you, but of some people, I sometimes think that this complaining about the Dutch openness has a little bit of naivety involved. And I don't want to offend anybody here. But countries defend their interests. They think about what their interest is and they go for it. We do it too. And that is not necessarily bad. It's part of how politics work. It works the same like that at the international level. It is not a sign of thinking, being inward looking or whatever. It is part of politics. And sometimes I read the newspapers and I read articles which give the impression as if the Netherlands doesn't know how to deal with Europe anymore, and that we don't play the European game anymore very effectively, and all the rest of it. I don't think that is really true, and sometimes I think we have a high level of self-criticism in the Netherlands, and that's why we more or less create maybe this image of that we're losing our open reputation. A few final remarks. First of all, our ministers aren't always very good at being diplomatic. I just come back from a conference in Germany, and there was one on the effects of ministers talking to the press and how that affects the interest rates during the euro crisis. And the first picture that was shown was of Jan Kees de Jager. Yes, that is bad news for the Netherlands. Our ministers should probably be more subtle in the news and when they make statements. And I think there's an important lesson to be learned, that what happens in each other's countries is much more international news than it used to be in the past. We commend it more often now about other countries. And our diplomatic skills should maybe be refined here and there, just marginally. We also think penny-wise, because now is also the time for the Netherlands to take international affairs more serious. Let me give some examples, or at least one. There's a whole discussion about the banking union, which is fundamentally about banking regulation. Banking regulation can only be done at an international level. For my work, I can really see that we need, here in The Hague, much more investments about what does this mean. But ministries are not they have a civil servant type of attitude, and they lack investments in the type of knowledge that we need. And there are more examples that I can give. It is more important to operate at the international level, and it requires investments, and it requires a different kind of style. Final remark, Roemer is the party leader of the SP. Sometimes I get the impression that Roemer, at least, is presented as somebody who wants to close the borders. And for sure, there are things that you might use against him in that respect. On the other hand, if Roemer would have won the election next week, the Netherlands would be a little bit more like France with Hollande, but we wouldn't move out of the EU or whatever else. It is just a change in tone. And I think, if we look at our debates that we have now in the Netherlands and the debate about borders, I don't think it's that absurd. It's just that would be a shift from our Merkel position to maybe a bit more a Hollande position. But that is we may not like it, but it is not the closing of our minds. Have I said enough?
You're just getting started.
Responses from the public.
It's up to you.
Thanks, Adriaan Schout. Gideon Shimshon.
So I think one
Taking
more
stock
in
against
favor
this.
of the thesis or another against it, saying not open, less open. I guess I'm somewhere in the middle. So maybe I should be convinced by one of you, right? But let me just lay out a couple of observations that I have, and then see where that takes us. So first of all, the personal experience. I recently got back on Schiphol, which is one of the great international hubs worldwide. People love traveling through Schiphol. They say it's one of the nicest airports. But when I got my train ticket, the train ticket option that I was shown immediately in English was comfort class ticket to Amsterdam, which I found out quickly was the more expensive ticket you could get to Amsterdam, which is kind of a way for our Dutch railway system to milk the expat that comes into the country as much as possible. So this is just one of the examples that I think expats or people that travel in the Netherlands sometimes get bumped by. I mean, try and get a taxi in Amsterdam, and it's really funny that the municipality of Amsterdam at a certain point instated chip cards for all the parking slots, but they didn't consider that foreigners would like to park too, and they didn't have these special cards, right? So that's kind of the negative view about traveling to this country and kind of having to deal with a somewhat old-fashioned banking system. If you want to pay with the Diners Club or with those type of things, that's something that we want. We want foreigners with money to come here, but they can actually not spend it. This is not good. On the other hand, we offer amazing possibilities for the expat community, I think. I mean, the 30% rule, I don't know if it still applies after 18 years, but it's...
Unfortunately not. We should change that, yes.
We just changed the R&D rules. Essentially, you can get a huge tax break when you put your R&D departments here. A lot of head offices love to be in the Netherlands. And in a way, when you walk, you come into a society and you live there, I guess there's always this sense of adaptation, and there I have to agree with the person sitting next to me, with Adriaan, because essentially the Dutch have always been, or has seemed to be, more liberal than the country. So being liberal is also compared to other places, right? If you try to get something done with the civil servants as France, it would be probably much harder than sometimes in the Netherlands. Although I don't understand why the Immigration and Naturalization Agency in the Netherlands, if you want to get a visa, you're only allowed to do so in Dutch. So there is only a Dutch site, for instance, which I found striking. So that's a bit my personal kind of looking around the Netherlands. On the one hand, very positive. People love being here. The cities are also seen as a fantastic thing. I mean, you cannot explain a Chinese person coming to the Netherlands that The Hague and Rotterdam are two different cities. For them, it's one, right? The whole axis of the region is one. And that's something sometimes we have to maybe explain a bit better, but it's also good because it seems to be working. I mean, all our different layers of polar model, the way we discuss with each other and the way we connect in the Netherlands, that's really a unique kind of system which work. And then we come more into theory. The Netherlands have always been diverse, but the question is whether they've been really tolerant. It was really tolerance often based on eigenbelang, which is the personal interest, which has driven a lot of Dutch growth in a positive way. I don't mean that in a negative way. But this axis between the economic value and public gain versus virtue is something that we might want to explore. Because if you look at, in a way, the Dutch society can be seen as almost schizophrenic. I mean, maybe this is a strong word, but on the one hand, we are closed. We don't really care about other people. You know, you can do your own thing. It's fine. Right? That's fine. Do your own thing, but don't bother me with it. And it's when the bothering comes, that's when the tension rises. And in that sense, the society, I do think, is changing. If you look at the history, there is a shift. But I don't know if it's good or bad. I think we're on a crossroad. And recently, one of the Dutch great export products, Liedewij Edelkort, she's a big future trend person, and she had a great speech on television, which I thought was inspiring. She was talking about the zeitgeist, about really what's happening in the rest of the world. And one of the big trends that she was seeing was really well, it's funny to say it in the Dutch context, but going back to the mountain, you know, where all societies seem to be less open, more tribal, more inward looking. And it's really the question how we're going to deal with that. And she would say this is a trend that has started a decade ago, but will continue for another 50 years. And now it's up to the politician, the opinion maker, the scientist, and society to figure out how to deal with it. Let me see if I've said everything that I had to say. Yeah, so, and then we come to the outward looking and the policy areas where I see some concern. For example, the aid, as you mentioned, and the defense budget, we've been slashing at it pretty harshly. And the question that comes then is whether we will be taken as seriously on the international and the geopolitical sphere. For such a small country, we have a huge, huge contribution there. And the question is, will we have that same contribution? And that kind of links me to the answer to the question. I think the answer to this question really depends on, well, that's maybe harsh because what happens with the elections, right? Will it go, in what direction will it go? It can push it into a certain level. But rest assured, the Netherlands is so tied into different discussion that once a decision, in the Netherlands, I don't think a decision is ever certain. This is the big difference with the Germans. That's what the Germans say about the Dutch, at least, that they talk, and then they take a decision and they talk again about the decision. While in Germany, you talk also for a very long time, but once you take a decision, you go. And you see that very much in the difference in policy, for instance, the Energiewende, and how the Germans are doing it, and how we're looking at sustainability. But these are general things that I think that the Dutch should take care of and be mindful to. And overall, if I look at the future, I just found out on the 20th of March, we were put as second best place in the world to do business by Bloomberg, so that was quite good. And apparently we're pretty high on the ranking of innovation, which always makes me feel good. And so there's a lot of potential and ability, and the fact that I do think the Dutch are very self-critical, and this klaagcultuur, this complaining thing we have is working out pretty well, because it's pushing us, we're pushing ourselves, and I think in a way that can work, but it can come across a bit negative, but I don't think they mean it like that, you know? So, yeah, I think I'll leave it at that.
Okay, so first impression is that from the three speakers, the expat is slightly more critical than the two native Dutch, which is interesting. By the way, who of you is an expat? I wanted to say expert, but maybe that's on the topic. Could you raise your hands who considers... And
you remain always expat.
I see people thinking, and then I see more and more hands coming out.
We could set
It's
a
all
meeting
about
up.
definition, right?
Join us.
Okay, what we would like to do without, we have to be careful and self-restrictive, not give a lecture, but we would like to show you some data and graphs about the topic. What would we be as a Montesquieu Institute without showing you some research? So the only thing is that I can't read what the screen says from here, so I will speak up a little bit and move towards that part of the screen. And maybe the speakers can take careful notes. Or maybe Peter, can I use one of the mobile, not phones, but microphones? Yeah. So here you will see some hard facts. You know, hard facts are important to inform ourselves about what is image and what is reality. And I say this with a little self-irony because there is a lot of in between it. So here are some facts that we found for you to inform the debate that we will have. Well, who's afraid of red, white and blue? The Migrant Integration Policy Index, it's a mouthful, but this index shows actually that the Netherlands ranks 5th among 31 European and North American countries since 2007, so the data are fresh, and that is not a bad performance, so that seems to be pretty good. The third best policy is on labour market mobility.
What is migrant integration?
Yeah, the Migrant Integration Policy Index is a composed index of how countries perform according to 7 different measures of how migrants integrate in society. So, for example, the level of employment, the level of illiteracy or literacy, multiple indicators that are kept in an index. And since this index contains the same indicators for the whole set of countries, it is at least comparable data that we have here. The third best policy is on labour market mobility, an interesting observation given the discussions about the labour market flexibilization in the Netherlands. Economic opportunities and targeted measures for foreign-born workers. Gideon, I think this is in line with the view that you just mapped out. Eurobarometer data from last year. 2/3 of the Dutch agree that immigration is economically and socially, culturally beneficial to the Netherlands. That is an interesting figure compared to only 53%, still a majority, but 53% of the average for the other European member states. This is data from the European Union 27. 85% of the Dutch agree that legal immigrants should have the same rights as Dutch citizens. That sounds like an open, liberal society, compared to still a majority, but less, for the EU average figures. A finding that is perhaps less positive about the Dutch, at least according to the Dutch, which is that 54% of the Dutch are not in favor of filling the gaps on the labour market with non-EU citizens. So this is about immigration, labour market immigration from non-EU citizens, compared to not favor, compared to only 46%. So that's the Netherlands is more critical towards immigration from outside the EU. This is an interesting world map where different countries are in a league about what expats. I don't know whether maybe you know this one, the Expat Explorer survey last year. And there is, again, it's an index of multiple indicators, and it shows that the Netherlands ranks 31st in the league table. So the Netherlands is 31st from a set of 31 countries in terms of favorable conditions according to the expats. So is the Netherlands a country that you like to live in as an expat? The Netherlands ranks 31st from 31 countries, so last. That's an interesting observation that doesn't seem to speak so much with the other figures that we showed. To summarize, expats in the Netherlands seem to have, according to the same survey, seem to have a hard time integrating in their new community, in The Hague or elsewhere. The second point is that they are more likely to have relocated to be with their partner, spouse, than become expats to progress their career. So moving into the Netherlands is because their partner or spouse moves into the Netherlands rather than that individuals seek for career opportunities. So it is a sort of an indirect reason to be an expat, you can say. Third, expats do not appear to be motivated by money or material goods, which is very good in a Calvinist country, and are unlikely to earn high salaries. So that is another thing that expat surveys comparatively have shown about the Netherlands. And finally, despite the, as Billy has noticed, increasing pressure for expats and other immigrants to learn Dutch, it doesn't appear to be an easy language. So they find learning the local language, local you can even talk about, The Hague, but the Dutch is a different language for expats in particular. So this actually shows a mixed picture. It seems that from an economic perspective, the Netherlands is doing well. We live up to the reputation that Adriaan Schout and Gideon in particular have mentioned about economics and innovation. We are a trading country. Remember that the previous Prime Minister, Jan-Peter Balkenende, talked about the VOC mentality, the old trade organization during the Golden Age. That we sometimes look back to as an example. But on the other hand, from a social, cultural perspective, there seems something going on. And now the question is that peculiar to the Netherlands, in your view, or is it something that we are experiencing as part of a global trend? Now I would like to open the floor and give the microphone as quick as possible to someone from the audience. And then finally, after we have some opinions from you, I would like the panelists again invite them to take their seats back so that they can respond. So who can I give the first? Maybe Peter is the facilitator, and I'm going back to my desk.
I guess I just have a question.
Can you introduce yourself?
My name is Emily Kovalarczyk, and I study at the University of Denver in the States. And I'm currently studying abroad at Maastricht University. And I guess I'm going to out myself here as an American, so I apologize for any naivety here. But my impression of both of you guys' opinions is that I'm very confused as what it means to be a European versus Dutch, and how they overlap in culture, and politically and economically. So my question, I guess, is, Mr. Allwood, from your perspective, what I got out of it was that as being Dutch, in a Dutch culture, they are not being as outward as they used to be. And then, I apologize for the pronunciation, but Schout? Oh, I'm sorry. I guess what I got out of your perspective is that on an international level and on a European level, they are actively working to be outward and trying to help on that level. So I guess just some clarity in, the differences from your guys' perspectives, and if I got it right, or what's...
Yeah, I think from my perspective, perhaps because I was talking about the view as an expat, I would say particularly living here in The Hague. And I think one of the issues I think we as an expat have, we have to deal with people on the street level. And I think sometimes you can say that it's the people on the street level who are more affected by the economic climate, things which are happening. And what I was interested with that survey, which said expats don't earn big salaries, I would say particularly in The Hague, if you talk about I would say the traditional expat, I would say his salary is more than the average Dutch person, because they tend to be well-educated people, and the reason they move here as an expat is mainly for their career, so they tend to be doing quite well. Is my view, especially people who work for the European Patent Office, patent examiners, people who work for the European Space Agency, rocket scientists and that type of thing. They tend to, I would say, have reasonable salaries, and also, as you alluded to, some of them also, because they work for UN type organisations, they don't actually pay taxes. So I think they're doing quite well. But then that's also a problem, I think, sometimes with the local community. Sometimes we're perceived as the people who are doing very well. We pay very little taxes, and especially I think here in The Hague, there's a policy from the gemeente to make this a really attractive city for international organisations. And if you take the belief that with the inburgering, say for instance, everybody should learn to speak Dutch and everybody should understand Dutch culture, we as expats don't play any part in that. And so I think there's a conflict between sometimes some of the local people and the expats, but on a higher level, say in the gemeente, they're glad that the expat community is here, the expat business is here, because you could say the business of, say, a city like The Hague is expats and international organisations. So I understand what you're saying, it's a dual.
I'm not quite sure what the question is. Because you spoke about the difference between the Dutch and the EU. Is that correct?
On a cultural level, the difference between being Dutch and being outward as a Dutch person versus being outward in the European community as a whole. On a street level, when you walk past a Muslim and you have a reaction to that, and that's changed over the years versus that can still be happening instantaneously as a country on a European level, the country's still being outward in their politics versus in their day-to-day culture. I guess that's the discrepancy.
But you see, I think first thing to say is that there are always many changes going on sort of permanent basis, and I think this debate that we now have, we probably could have had 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. I think you spoke about a tipping point. Is it? I think every day we're on a sort of tipping point. Things are changing continuously, and the example you give about if you pass a Muslim, well, that's globally, I guess. That's the same in the US, maybe as it is in other countries. There are certain patterns going on all over the world. There are new issues developing. We have to debate them. We have to talk about them. And it will be very hard to label many of these discussions, even including migration, tolerance towards maybe Islam, to take King Willis's point, as opening or closing our external orientation. Having said that on a more general level, now looking at the distinction between the Netherlands and the EU, for me it is just, I see it on a daily basis, the discussions where we are in, although the Dutch think themselves, I read it in the Dutch newspapers, in the Volkskrant, in NRC, in Trouw, in the newspapers, I read that the Netherlands is a pariah country. We are the odd ones out, we only look at ourselves. I just see that that is not true. A bit of it, I understand it, but generally there's not that. I also see these developments on a more international level, maybe for a more subtle policy debate. Things are changing continuously. How do you label it? Now, the idea that the Netherlands wants to reduce foreign aid as basically a non-European issue. Well, we can talk about Lady Ashton if you want, but basically that is something, it's our foreign aid abroad. What is changing in society, and not only in the Netherlands, but also in many other countries in the world, is that there's, maybe partly because of the recession, as you alluded to earlier on, is that there is an awareness. What does it all bring? Are there more alternative, better alternatives for development aid and cooperation, like reducing imports? We're still working on that. Micro investments, this is the new trend, maybe even more effective. So you can take that as a sign that the discussion about development cooperation as a sort of, okay, that's a change in policy, we're probably inward looking, and it's not necessarily a European area. But it's also a debate about changes, about now what is it actually that we try to achieve, and what are effective instruments, how can we use our money best, etc. And I also see those discussions, not just in the Netherlands, I see it in other countries too, the same debates, and not even limited to the EU. So I'm not quite sure whether there's no link between the discussions that we have as the Netherlands in the EU and whether we have them externally. And I also don't think that particularly Dutch, and I think in a dynamic time frame there will be other issues continually going up and coming up, like now development cooperation. But policies are changing, and every time countries have to find their positions and what's best. I think that's just the discussion that we have. We try to label them and criticize them, but sometimes we have to just run with them and not only see them as something narrow-minded. But
I'll just quickly add to that, because I really like, it's like the personal, the political, but if you look at it from a more overarching view, you could look from a societal perspective, what it is to be a Dutch person, what it means to be a European, how that interrelates. I always like the term this imagined community by Benedict Anderson. This is basically what we are, right? We construct social systems and culture around communities that we don't even know. And I think every person needs to ask this question to himself, where I am in the society and what I think. I'm always reminded of the truck driver that in the Netherlands that doesn't like the European Union for the Polish people that sit in the truck and drive around, but likes it because it gives him incredible amount of potential and expert potential and actually gives him his job. And it's that dichotomy that is getting more and more to the fore when you have an economic downturn. You know, when everything is great and it's all positive, but now it's also for some degree about making choices. And individuals do that, they do that in their families, and they do that on a political level. Just one small addition, if I may, because I was really struck by the expat statistics. And one thing that I do feel in the Netherlands, very positive about the outward looking, but the social communities in the Dutch social communities are very close. I think expats can attest to that. Basically, social networks here formed at university at an early age, and it's very hard to kind of get into it, right? And these communities are quite close, and it's friends for life, and you're kind of from your university. And by the way, I'm talking quite elitist because I guess I went to college, so that's what I know. But if I can talk from that perspective, then I think that's kind of something that expats have a big problem with. It's not like it's not easy making friends, you know, if I may.
That's true.
Yeah.
I see, yeah. The gentleman, yeah? Oh, yeah. Well, ladies first, but you will have to turn.
It's okay. Yeah, you actually brought up something I was going to mention about, is it Dutch first and European second? But the issue has been going through my mind is once upon a time globalisation was a real buzzword. I wonder if this is a rebound effect of nationalism versus globalisation. You know, we're nationals first. I'm talking worldwide. I'm also talking European-wide as far as how the European Union is going. I am an expat, but I've actually only recently arrived here. But I've been an expat mostly in Eastern European countries, particularly ones that went into the EU in 2004. And I'm just wondering if you have any views on this nationalism that seems to be working more. I'll give you one example. I was working in Hungary for nearly 5 years was back there recently. I have very strong feelings for the place, and I'm very concerned about the nationalistic fervour that seems to be spawned by a right-wing government. Also, the anti-Semitism that's happening there, the media censorship in one form or another that's happening there. And what does the EU do about the countries that do this? Are there any rules? This is another question entirely, of course, but are there any rules? There's rules for getting into the EU, but are there any rules for kicking them out?
Shall we keep it at these questions? Who would like to?
Thank you for that question. I think you touch up on a critical point, and I do think that we need to be careful of what happens next in that sense, because this trend, this trend I was referring to, this long-term trend of more closeness, more focus on crafts and arts, but in the local community, this inward-looking thing, tribalism, this is something that you do see and will continue to go. Whether it doesn't replace globalism, but it changes globalism. And the question is, how do we deal with it? I don't have immediate answers, but it's something that we need to be aware of. When it comes to globalism, this will only become bigger, because these communities that you discuss, when it comes to anti-foreign movement, anti-Semitism, these communities are going global. So you don't find your friends only in the national area, but you also create networks all across the globe with the same view. And that's, on the one hand, in this super connected world, the benefit, because you can find everybody, but you can also get lost in your own little world, it's all of a sudden it turns out that there are many people that think exactly like you, and you don't have to discuss with anybody else, right? There is no need to go beyond the borders if you are connected to exactly like-minded people, and that's when there is a risk of losing that connectedness with different ideas, with different views, where panels like this, even if we would, be more distanced from each other, could not happen because we simply wouldn't find each other. And that's the dark side of globalization, even, I would say. And it's about finding the right balance there. And I think you raise a very good question, but maybe you can answer it.
Me?
I'm sorry.
Is this an invitation to disagree?
No, I think it's an excellent point. Sorry.
No. I suppose one of the interesting things you were saying about nationalism, one of the things I find, especially about living in The Hague, and I think it's probably similar with all the big cities in the Netherlands, that over 50% of the people are non-Dutch. And I think one of the issues, and I think it's not to lay the blame, but I don't think we're actually represented enough in what goes on in these cities. And that's also part of our problem. We have to be active citizens. I think, especially for, I say, the expat communities, a slight problem is they believe themselves to be transient. So they don't get involved in local politics. Often then their children are not involved with local children. Why? Because they tend to go to an international school. They tend to be in locations, they tend to live in areas where they have a lot of international people. And I think that can create an us and them type culture. And also, I think, one of the things which, when I said to people, perhaps if you go, for instance, like in The Hague, for instance, there's 50% ethnic minorities or 50% non-Dutch. If you go to the Gemeente House and you look in the city council, I think there's 46 councillors. And if you just do, say, like a colour count or something like that, you find that sort of the 50% of us who live here are not represented in the city council. And I think that also is something which has to change. It's going to take time, but I think that's also one way of getting everybody represented in the right ways. Because also I think one of the issues, I think, with, if you look probably historically with Dutch society, there's been this pillarization. You know what I mean by pillarization? The structuring within the Dutch society where certain groups share with others. And the fact is, I think the new groups have come in the last, say, 20, 30 years are not a part of this, because these sort of rules, these unwritten rules, were well established before we arrived. And so we have to somehow find our way into the powers, into where the representation, and where we can also have, I would say, a bigger influence in what's going on, especially I think the big three cities in the Netherlands.
Adriaan, if you'd like to add to that?
This point that you bring up about representation, I know from the academic literature best, but then from the UK. So it's not a, it's these are patterns that you see everywhere else. Just on a side note, two things, because Billy and Gideon have said, I think, most already, but the first thing is Hungary. I think what Hungary may show is that we see now with the Euro crisis in all the other countries, patterns are so hard to change. There are traditions in countries related to democracy, related to representation, values. They're very hard to change. And one of the patterns that we have in the Netherlands, I think, is that we are pragmatic and, I guess, in a way, open-minded. So I'm not so sure whether we can easily compare trends in societies between the Netherlands and Hungary and other countries. Just something I would like to add is that I have seen about the Netherlands a lot of discussion about that the left flank and the right flank are coming up so strong, so powerful. It's all over the Financial Times and Wall Street Journal, the Dutch newspapers, is that our extremist flanks become. And what are they? Closed. There's the PVV's, the SP, and all the rest. To a large extent, this is just bad luck for the Netherlands because we have the middle parties in dreadful leaderships. States. So who would ever vote for a middle party, traditionally one of the bigger parties, where there is no appealing leader? You know, even the Christian Democrats, which they would traditionally really vote for their party. So the impression that people have of our flanks, of our more extreme parties, the impression they've created all around the world, more or less, it's just bad luck. And now we see Gideon Shimshon from the Labour Party doing very well, and he's gaining back these votes very quickly. And at least one of those pillars, or maybe more extreme as it's regarded externally as the extreme, is going down, and we become all of a sudden so much more this sort of societal medium country. So maybe on a positive note.
Depends on the leadership, which can be rather, volatile.
Yeah, but that's good for the Dutch society, actually.
Yeah.
The Germans have a much different party system, in the sense that it's much more difficult in Germany to start a new party. So they keep being stuck with the Social Democrats and the Christian Democrats, whereas we, Pink Fortuyn can come in and boom, it goes up, but it dies out very quickly. And we have a very flexible system which can deal with the societal emotions and the ebb away.
We have 2-year election cycles.
Yeah, quicker than Italy and Belgium actually last year. I've seen other people who'd like to have. I think the gentleman there was the first, and then maybe Lucy. Yeah.
My name is Burger, and I lived in also an expat, but close by in Brussels for 35 years. And since a little less than 2 years, I'm now back. And I would like to come back to, let's say, the image of the expat which you have of the Netherlands and the problems. I can tell you that all these problems you were mentioning about not being close connected to the Belgians in my case, or having problems there and so on, they're all exactly the same there as they are here. The only difference, I think, and I'd like to have the opinion of the panel here, is the image. The image of Holland. If you say, as a foreigner, not being Belgian or Dutch, I'm going to work, I've got a job in Brussels, working for the European institutions or whatsoever, then everybody says, oh, nice, Brussels, nice place, you can eat very well there, and so on. If you talk to Mr. Allwood there, say, I've got a job in London, oh, fantastic, particularly after the Olympic Games and so on. Or if you say I go to Paris, yes, I mean that's something. If you say, oh, I'm being posted in The Hague, my God, what are you going to do in The Hague? Terrible place there. I mean, that is the image, and I would like to have your opinion on that, because I think that being 31 at the 31st place on the grading is partly a problem of that also.
Yeah, about that. Sorry. I understand I've been here 18 years, and fortunately I think The Hague has really improved as an attractive city for expats. And also I think it's an attractive city for the residents. You know, when I came here 18 years ago, I was working for a Brazilian mining company, so often we had to talk to them late on the phone, so I'd be leaving the office about 7 o'clock. And at that time, you know, it seems strange now when you talk to younger people, at 7 o'clock, if you wanted just to say a loaf of bread or some milk, the only place you could go was the gas stations, the petrol stations. And I lived in one of the nicer neighbourhoods, I suppose, of The Hague, the Stadskwartier, and I remember, it must have been, I don't know, 10 years ago, 11 years ago, when the first Avondwinkel opened. There was a big discussion, about an Avondwinkel. And when I first came to The Hague, I think once a month there was late night shopping on a Thursday or something like that. And now it's completely changed. I think there's two things. I think one is maybe pressure from the expats, but also I think the local Dutch people have embraced it. So, so I think that's what's happened, I would say, in The Hague. But also I think your point is, if you say to an expat, you're being relocated to Paris, I think you tend to think, I'm going to Paris, first I have to learn to speak French. That would be a must, I think. And also you tend to feel, I'm going to embrace French culture. You may not know what it is, but you would have an idea that I'm going to become French. I think the problem is with I think Hollanders in general, you know, you say, I'm going to Holland, you know, I mean, I think most people, they go to Amsterdam. Amsterdam is open, it's liberal, but apart from that, Dutch culture, you know, there is a Dutch culture, but people don't really know what it is, and it's not something which you want to embrace, say, as French culture or Italian culture. You know, Dutch, and I think that's probably because Dutch are very open-minded, very liberal, and you know, you come, you can do what you want. You know, in the beginning, when you don't have to speak English, you don't have to speak Dutch. We speak English. The Dutch will say, our language is very difficult, so we'll speak to you in English. You know, as an Englishman, you go to France. And you say, will you speak English? And you know, and I give people the example of, you know, I go to quite a few receptions with embassies, and you'll say how the ambassador, say, of Brazil or whatever, and there'll be other ambassadors there, be people from municipality, people from foreign affairs, and the guy will start talking in English, and everybody will think it's normal. You know, you can imagine that happening in Paris.
Would you like to respond to this question, or do we take another question?
Well, just very briefly, I think on the one hand, when in Rome, do as the Romans. You know, that's part of the thing you have to do. You have to adapt. Oh, you know, we wanted a panel, so maybe.
When you feel that you have to go to saunas.
Actually, that's a funny comment, because in Finland, it is, if you work for a Finnish company, and I have, and you're in Finland, you will have to go to sauna. I mean, there's no way about it. And actually, I think it's also very non-gender sensitive, because women and men sip separately, and it creates all kinds of societal problems that the Finns are now talking about. Because, you know, business deals are also done there. Just to give you an example about a very local practice that impacts society and the way you do business. And Americans don't like to go into sauna with
But that's why I said,
you know, so but there is this, on the other hand, it says something about the Dutch being very adaptable, because I guess we'll do that kind of thing if it brings in business. But to your point, let's not compare apples with pears. It's much cooler in a way when you say, it's in perception, huh? I really love living in The Hague, but you know, if you go to New York, if you go to London, and then you compare that to The Hague is nowhere near that kind of level of a capital, and it has purely to do with amounts of people. Even Amsterdam is amazing how it's branded. It's a huge brand. It's worldwide. Everybody knows Amsterdam, but it's 900,000, maybe 1 million people living there. We're talking London is 10 million people. Paris also that amount. So that's, you know, so that makes it also very interesting and attractive to be here for certain types of people. Okay.
Yeah, a final point then, and then we'd like to give someone else
I just want to
the
say
floor
that
for a question.
I just want to say that I really like the question. I've worked for many, many years in the European environment, and there are good things and there are bad things to say. Once I was on a purely scientific panel, and there were Dutch people in the audience, and we tend to be outspoken. And with the microphone open, my British neighbour bowed over to me, and the microphone was open, and he said, "God, I hate." Did you hear this?
Yes.
Yeah.
God, I hate the Dutch. And you know, this is the impression that I've heard very often. The Dutch are rude, blunt. You know, our minister is actually so. I would actually be very tempted to, you know, if you raise this question, why do you raise this question? What is it that you would have liked to hear or like to say about our reputation? Because it may be.
But it's worked out pretty well for us at the same time. That's, you know.
Well, let's ask the audience. I mean, are we experiencing a common frustration here that the Dutch are blunt and rude? You wouldn't think so if you see us here as panelists, but what is your impression? Yeah?
Shall I say?
If you can address this question.
No, just not only this question, but if I may allow to say something else. My name is Khalid Chaudhry. At the moment, I'm a candidate for the second chamber, Tweede Kamer, Partij van de Toekomst, Party of for the future of the future. I fully agree with you that Netherlands have been changed since last few decades, 1 or 2 decades, especially since the September 11. And the reason is it's not economic recession, but something else, and that was our foreign policy. What you just mentioned, that perhaps we will have to change our policy, and I would definitely suggest that Netherlands needs to change foreign policy, not to follow blindly United States of America. Last week, Bishop Desmond Tutu, he demanded the arrest and trial of George Bush, Dick Cheney, and Tony Blair, because they have destroyed, the global values and many, many things. So if we are talking about Netherlands, definitely yes, there have been lot of problems because of wilders in the Middle East. There have been many issues, discussions and debates when Dutch investors or the Middle Eastern investors wanted to come over to The Hague to invest something. There have been there have been many reservations because of Mr. Wilders' policies, certainly. Then you were talking about Mr. Rutte. Mr. Rutte.
Can you put it in a question?
Okay. Let me put into a question. That wouldn't it be the best solution for the Netherlands as a very, very small country on the globe, that the leadership starts thinking about global values, and under the global values adopt policy matters and policies, whatever the policies are, whether they are social, political policies or economical policies. Thank you.
This is about outward-looking orientation. Who would like to take this question?
Yeah, I think for me, from a person who thinks I'm born in the UK, my parents are Jamaican. One of the things I like about living in the Netherlands, because I'm living on continental Europe, is I feel more European than living in the UK. And I think because of that, I think that sort of, in a way, globalization, we all live on this earth together. And I think you are right, what happened after 9/11, there's a sort of been, I would say, a fear of Islam, Muslim, whatever. And I think not just Netherlands but Europe have to sort of find a way to be at ease with it, because I think that sort of if you look back over history, there's always been religious conflict. The British Church, or the British Church was formed out of conflict of religion. And so it's not going to go away, and I think we can't just close our borders and say it's not going to be there. And also there is a bit of an issue, you could say, there's not too many oil people here, but some of the regions where we have Islam countries is also oil. So there's also an economic, social, and that all is in the mix. And I think, I'd say responsible governments have to find a way of sorting that out.
I think you said very many wise words. But on the thing of the global values, I do see the Dutch government working on global values, actually. The Dutch is a very active supporter when it comes to rule of law. And rule of law is an international value. And that there's just here in the Peace Palace, the Dutch invested in a 2-day, very massive get-together with all kinds of lawyers and politicians from all over the globe, really to put this on the agenda, rule of law. And also in the EU, you can clearly see that the Dutch are doing something about rule of law, and they're sticking out their necks, and they even veto decisions.
So let me interrupt you, please. Do you think supporting Iraq war and supporting Afghanistan war is for the rule of law? While everybody knows the realities about the Iraq war, everybody knows about the Afghanistan war on terror. It is exactly for the minerals, for the natural resources of Afghanistan and some other areas. So what kind of rule of law we are talking about?
Well, I'm perfectly happy to talk about that. I think it's generally been regarded as a mistake, even by George Bush, and not George Bush, but by Tony Blair. And I think, if you want my personal opinion, that was a rushed decision here. It was a very narrow decision too. But you spoke generally about global values, and I respond to the general value of global values, and I think it fits in our tradition, this about the rule of law. I think as a general global value, we are a defender in international fora of deregulation and liberalization. We are a defender of human rights. We are also a defender of environmental developments and protection. Less than 5 years ago, but that has to do, I think, with the crisis. It is by far from the Dutch international agenda, from different ministries here. So I do think that there are international values that the Dutch are very active in. It also comes back to my point that I said we may be investing in it. For example, when it comes to international monitoring of banks, we do know there's a problem. The Dutch are very much behind all kinds of strengthening of the rules for international banking. We're very active in that area. In fact, we're one of the countries pushing it. Well, yes, I think I can safely say that. And that comes back to the rule of law. This is a very important development about the international values. There's for the Netherlands, there's an awful lot at stake here, because China is playing by different rules compared to what the EU wants to do. And the US is playing by different rules. And there's actually quite a conflict in many areas between the EU, the Netherlands, and the US when it comes to liberalization, agricultural policy, etc. The Chinese have a very state-oriented international perspective. Now, for the EU, and specifically for the Netherlands, we thrive best in a deregulated, liberal, international trading area. That's what we've always been good at. The Chinese are now playing by different rules, and they may actually be better. And that poses very serious questions to what are the global values that we can work with, because there's a conflict of global values going on at the moment under the heading of multipolar world. Where do we fit in? What are the values that we need to have? We're still on the values of liberalization, human rights, environmental protection, rule of law. That's what we still are. But are those really the values that are now the kind of values that you need to have to survive in this multipolar world? So I do see this debate happening. I do see the Dutch involved in it. I see the EU involved in it. I wouldn't, if you want, I will classify the support for Iraq as a failure. I can easily do that because I never understood what we were going to do there. We can talk about global values of democracy, but we also knew at the time that democracy is not the same in different kinds of countries. So we all saw these difficulties. But that mistake, as big as it was, that doesn't mean that I think the Netherlands is not thinking about global values. And we do have problems with that because we're lost a little bit in the values that we have. I will again defend the Dutch here because I think this is a very difficult debate where I cannot tell you what the best global values are these days. I like liberalism and free trade and human rights protection, but I also know that if that is not the international world that we're dealing in, that we may have to reconsider them, and then I'm personally getting a little bit lost in, okay, what are our global values that we have to stick by? I'm still sticking to liberalism. But this is what the Netherlands is talking about.
Thank you, Anja, for the geopolitical view on values and interesting response to the question. I hope, the question has been addressed to an extent. I would like to give some other people, before we close the debate, the possibility. I see someone, let's say, from the younger part of the audience, and then I would like to move to you. So maybe, can you?
Yeah, I'm a bit puzzled by something Mr. Allwood said. Just to quote you, something like, it's a pity that the Dutch gave up the fight to make their neighbors more liberal. And that was, in your point of open-mindedness. But doesn't open-mindedness prompt that you accept views from your neighbors that are less liberal?
I suppose yes, in one way, but I think you're asking my opinion over I was trying to say something what for me was, from a generation where, we can have this discussion about drug laws, people can have their views for and against, but if you're for more liberalisation of drug laws, and and it's again with experience, for like my parents are Jamaican, so I know what happens in Jamaica with the marijuana growth. It's a sort of industry there, but it's criminality involved, and you tend to feel, will it ever go away? It's just a bit like with prohibition in America. It never went away, and some people say that the big financial growth of the mafia was during prohibition. Yeah? And so, my view is that Netherlands had this position where I'd say in Holland it seemed to be working sort of okay. There's always going to be problems, and the other countries around were complaining. So now you see, in Maastricht they have some problems, and and in some respects, as real liberal, you probably would have hoped that Holland the Netherlands would have fought harder, that Europe got more progressive in their drugs policy. Not because I'm a great drug user, but I think that I think it's more to do with it's always going to be there. If you look at what's happening in Mexico, you're not going to get rid of it. So just to sort of put your head in the sand and say it's going to go away if we legalise it, I don't think it's going to happen. If that answers your question.
You can evade reality, but you cannot evade the consequences of evading reality.
That's one to think about. Here in the front, yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much. My name is Hilke Melchers. in my daily practice, we make programs for diplomats to understand the Netherlands better. So what I'm going to say has a lot to do with what I'm doing actually. There's a couple of things that I think are maybe interesting to point out. First of all, there is a concern in the Netherlands that we are turning too much inside. The reason for that, I think, is that we are just confused because the world is changing quite a lot. Traditional values don't necessarily apply anymore, and new answers need to be found that haven't been found. We are trying to get to understand where we are. In the meantime, there's new technology introduced in society. People are unfamiliar with what it means in ethical terms. We still have to define a lot of things. World is spinning around a little bit, and I think we are somewhat uncomfortable with that. That's my first comment. The second comment is on Afghanistan. It's a very painful situation from the point of view, the Americans have a basic different reaction from their background to the world than anybody else. So the particular reaction that the United States had, whether 9/11 was actually self-involved or was from an outside source, is then becoming irrelevant. But the reaction is typically American, and it has to do with the Wild West, and they just do this action because that's how the United States works. Now, as for the Dutch position, we are trying to be loyal people. So Mr. De Hoop Scheffer, Secretary General, we were linked in NATO, we found, we had to do something. Secondly, he was looking for a new position because NATO's original position was actually not worthwhile anymore for keeping, so he's looking for a new target, reason why he did it. Was it legal? If you look from international standards, it was completely illegal, so it's power play. So that we accept as a matter of fact, and whether everybody's going to be happy with it is a different question. Now the third thing that maybe is interesting here is, in the future, what can the Dutch do? It was said already that the Dutch are pragmatic. Whatever they say, in the end, is not counting apart from the pragmatism that we apply, and there is ethics in pragmatism. It's not that pragmatism means, I can do left or right, whatever my mood dictates me. There is an ethics about pragmatism, and we are very good at it. And I think for many foreigners it's very hard to understand how this actually operates, because we send out messages on principles, and then we start acting on practice. That's my contribution. Thank you.
Gideon.
I think you're absolutely right when it comes to the global values, and we talked about that already a little bit. That's kind of something we have to deal with, and that's changing. And I think the Dutch are very adaptable and are finding new ways, and we're kind of in that shift as we speak. To speak about the foreign policy, and that's an interesting one, because that's really an outward-looking. If you're talking about outward-looking, foreign policy and defense are the two most outward-looking parts of the government. Although that also is changing, right? Because municipalities talk with this. So all these are part of the shifts that you were referring to earlier. But if you look at the response of the Netherlands, apart from being pragmatic in its policy, it's also been very innovative in the way we've implemented and have been thought leaders when it comes, for instance, to post-conflict reconstruction. The Dutch approach is world-renowned, and we've worked very closely together with the British and many other countries to implement that type of approach, which, with all its negativities and things you can say about, the point is that we will, you see that the Dutch have been engaged on the geopolitical skill, and for a large part, I do believe, and that's, the Peace Palace is here for a reason, because there is this belief in society that we do want to do good. And I think this duality, I really like this term of doing good and doing well. The Dutch have always, I like to think, I'm not sure it's always true, but I'd like to think that would be, if you look at the broader sense of what we're trying to do, that would be the thing, or at least that would be my mission or my vision for what I would like the Dutch to be. And I hope many people agree. That said, it doesn't mean there are no mistakes. It doesn't mean that there are no bad choices. It doesn't mean that we all have to agree. I don't want to sound like I'm some kind of government spokesperson, because the Dutch have made mistakes and they will continue to do so. But overall, I think the how do you say, the number under the line is kind of okay.
Well, the 3D example,
yeah,
that we try to bring in Afghanistan with development.
Exactly.
Not aggressive and defend and
yeah, but that too is including the military.
It is, but it was also, I mean, if you bring back the point of doing good and doing well, there was a clear element of doing good involved, but it was also, in essence, doing well, because, okay, we wanted to be visible, we wanted to, you know, take a stake, and we thought it would lead us to, you know, important international positions. You know, we were thinking about our own pragmatic interests, but we were also trying to do the right thing, at least. And to add to that, it may have been a mistake, but,
my worry is that we're going to, that's why I said that the change in government might change that, because I really believe that not investing in defense, not investing in those foreign relations will take away that. And we had fantastic people at very high positions in the World Bank, in the UN, over the last years, and you don't see them anymore. I mean, that's my worry. You know, Wijfels, Ritze, and all those people from the, I forgot the names, but they were Melkert indeed, and the Hoop Scheffer.
Yeah, I've heard this argument many times, and I see the value of it. But I also see that at the sub-level, below the high ranks, the Dutch are very active still in engaging and sending out civil servants and having ambassadors in international organizations. So we're still very active players, although we do not have those key positions. I always find this discussion in the Netherlands about that, oh, we may not have the key position. It just misses. Of course, it would be nice, but it somehow misses the point that we're so much more strongly involved on many layers and with the debates. And you know, this is where I do think that the Dutch can also make better contributions by investing more in studies and workshops and all the rest of it. But we do well on that.
But it should have been only 2 Ds. Not the 3rd D, because involving guns and bullets, you can never ever produce peaceful results.
No, but we were trying. No, I agree. But we,
3 Ds, you know.
Well, gentlemen, wait. There is. I've seen 2 people who would like to bring up a point, and before we close this debate, I would like to give them the possibility. So, go ahead there, and then I think Lucy, you wanted to have something on the agenda. Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you very much. My name is Steven. I am Dutch, but I'm here because of several reasons. And, I work for a European organization based here in The Hague, so I work a lot with expat communities. We have a lot of trainees, for example, from abroad. Also, my girlfriend, she's from Colombia. We're now trying to make her have her migrate here to the Netherlands in a legal way. And at the same time, I have a colleague who was also becoming an expat, and it's very noticeable what the difference is between somebody who's a knowledge migrant, where the procedures are really easy, and somebody who's coming like not with a job and has to learn Dutch already before even entering the country to a certain level. So I'm really concerned by that. I also I do think we are outward looking. I don't think we're fairly tolerant. I mean, if you look at the media, there's a lot of news about what's going on. I mean, Merkel, she's very often in the news. We are very aware, internationally aware of what's going on. We have one of the best internet connections of the world. And in terms of businesses, yes, it's very attractive to sort of settle in the Netherlands. We make it very attractive economically. But on a human level, we see that there's really a sort of paradigm shift, and it's very worrying. And it started indeed after 11 September and the events happening in America. And it's really a European trend, or even a Western trend, that you see that more inward looking or at least a lesser degree of solidarity. And I think it started with the media, really. And now the worrying thing is that by repeating this message all over and over again, in the beginning the Netherlands was shocked about the things that was said by right-wing politicians. And then this message was repeated over and over and over again, so that people started to believe in it. And still you can see that was also about the data, that in terms of perception, the Dutch are really, there's a difference with the policy and popular opinion. I just think that people have not been able to fight for that. I mean, the inburgeringstest was introduced by Rita Verdonk, and we know how she left Dutch politics. Like, totally disagreed. Nobody took her seriously. The policies that she introduced are still there. So I think how I also heard all your arguments, and I think we are really practical. And perhaps we are very blunt as Dutch, and we don't care so much about our image. But I do think we have to be realistic, and at the moment our image is very hurtful. And it's also hurtful in a way that it's against our self-interest. I mean, we advocate that we are in favor of democracy and all these things. But in reality, we also have to make that work. We have to have a very critical press. Well, it's not really happening in the Netherlands. So my question now is, how can we sort of change this cycle, and how can we make people in the Netherlands care more about our image and really be more welcoming to the expat, but not only the expat community, I would say migrants in general. So.
Being owner and the inventor of a platform, what would your response to this for expats? What would your response be on this question?
I think with a lot of response has to be, it's like a two-way street. I think one is that sort of, perhaps it's been too easy for expats, but I think there's got to be a way where more coming together. I'd say not just expats, but I think it's all migrants. And with what is, I think the gentleman there was saying about the Dutch are getting confused, I also think it's a problem that the nature of being of Dutch is changing. You know, in the big cities, you know, what is a Dutch person? Is it white, blonde, 6 foot tall, or is it a sort of a Moroccan woman wearing a hoofddoek? You know, I mean, they're all Dutch, and I think that sort of often when the opinions are about the Dutch, I could say in one level it's the traditional, what can be termed the traditional, if that's such a word. The Dutch people are getting confused because, in a way, their world is changing. You know, in the big cities, when you're now living in a multicultural environment, and that is a big change for some people. You know, there are some people who do get a bit concerned. If a Muslim moves into my neighbourhood, now if you're used to living in multicultural environments, a mosque is a mosque. You know, a synagogue may come, a mosque may come, who cares? But for some people, if you've been brought up in a certain way, that can be very threatening. And it's, in the city of The Hague, and there are people doing programs where people come together. It could be through sport, through other things, where they just meet each other. You know, they don't have to know whether I'm a Muslim, whether I'm a Jew, whether I'm something else. That people come together and people just meet, and often they find that there's not so great differences between people. And I think that's where I think in Netherlands, where there's still this like separation. You know, we're in different groups and we're looking out. You know, I mean, am I looking after you? And I think that has to change. And I think there's got to be some way embracing. And I think for the Netherlands, multiculturalism. I think, and also if we embrace this, we also embrace, I think, a bit like where I see you have a chance, especially in The Hague. You have so many international people who, in general, actually quite like living here. But are they Dutch? Are they, I have a son who was born here. He has a British passport. He's never lived in the UK. And when he's 18, he has to choose between having a British and a Dutch passport. Why? You know, I mean, is he British or is he Dutch? You know, why does he have to choose? Yeah? And I think that's, so in a way to take nationality out of it, does it have to be that important? Is my view. You know, I think especially somewhere like The Hague has an opportunity really to be a sort of a showcase or a test case as a truly international city. Yeah, I'm not saying it's easy, but that's why I said you have to start with a dream, with a plan. Yeah, but I think there is a possibility here because it is very international. But anyway, that's just my personal.
Well, can I? Yes. One small remark. I agree that, for example, Rotterdam and Amsterdam is a different case. Even Utrecht would be a different case. I would set The Hague quite apart. In the sense that for the Dutch, The Hague is not a town. The Hague is a place, and basically it's very calm, and the bourgeois rules the place. I mean, and they stratified. And their stratification doesn't include foreigners apart from saying hello, how do you do?
Yeah.
That's very simple.
Yeah.
And if they have to change, The Hague is not a good place to say so. I mean, Amsterdam would be a better place, Rotterdam would be a better place, even Utrecht would be a better place. The Hague would possibly be the last one to do so. I'm not sorry to say so. It's not that we're unfriendly to foreigners, but that's the way it works.
Yeah. Can I give the microphone to an expat who actually lives in The Hague? Lucy behind. Maybe you want to raise another question, but maybe you can.
Well, I think
one
it's partly common. There might be a question at the end of it, but probably won't. But it's just something that I keep hearing a lot, and I think Adriaan kind of mentioned it. It was, I think, sort of the underlying threat in your argument, and I think Gideon alluded to it a little bit more. That's, sometimes this sort of inward turn is, this sort of these trends are actually a sign of pragmatism, and the Dutch are practical. We know what we're doing. We know exactly what we're doing, and this is, there are a host of reasons. And I always worry because I hear these arguments a lot from the Dutch. That this can turn to be a little bit of a slippery slope ultimately, because pragmatism can turn into you can then sort of self-justify quite a lot, and I think that especially in sort of economically tough times, the sort of the pragmatism argument has been made historically in these strange societies a lot. And so, this is sort of a tendency that I see, that there's a lot of sort of, very often it's very justified, and I understand, but when do we sort of, when do you know that pragmatism is justified argument or sort of excuse, and where do you draw the line? How the society discusses it? Is it raised by anyone? Is there sort of a need to? Or do you sort of, because you're Dutch,
Yeah. Adriaan, and then after you, Gideon. Yeah.
Oh.
No, go ahead. It's your turn.
That's why we have debates so often. You see, there is no answer to it. We just debate. We are not just. I understand what you say, and I wish that was the end of the discussion, because you said as an expert, you commented on our society. We have to listen to that, respect it, and not say. We go home and reflect on it for 2 weeks. But you also said it on the way, and then I thought, no, it's not enough that you say this, because you said that we don't interact in a way, that we respect each other's privacies, more or less.
That's a generalization.
Yeah, that's what you said, and I agree. But I also want to say that it has something from the good side too. It is not just the negative. It's also the part of the tolerance, and I see the irritation of it. Now to the pragmatism, which in this case is of course also the pragmatism, we also debate a lot. It's not really only true that we leave each other in peace, but we also debate a lot. And through that, and we debate probably more violently than in other countries, partly because, as I just said, our political party system is so flexible. We get that actually out in Parliament. Look at Germany, they don't have it. There's a sort of repressed debate on I won't mention it, but, well, the EU, let me mention it. It is not out in Parliament as it is here. And that it's not that there is, when we know when pragmatism is good or bad. We take decisions. We go to Iraq, wrong. you know, we just we admit it. And you know, we pay for it because then, of course, we still have to go extra years to Afghanistan or whatever. But you know, we debate a lot. That is what we do. I think there are few taboos in our debates. We debate on everything. Now look at the elections. I think that's very important here. We are actually very tolerant to the EU. We thought the elections would be against Europe. Well, they weren't against Europe. Except for Geert Wilders, even the SP, all the other parties are in favour of European integration. We just decided it's much better to go on with the euro and to go on with Europe and just accept it and you know, talk about our own cutbacks in the Netherlands. So it's not, the question is not when do we know that pragmatism is enough or going in the wrong direction. We debate a lot and just we decide, and then the next problem comes up and we'll debate a lot and we'll decide, and some decisions are wrong, some are right. I was really happy with the debates on the elections that we have now, because there's clarity on our pragmatisms to with European integration. There's actually solidarity in that, you know. Who would have thought 2 weeks ago? So that's, you know, I like these Dutch when they talk about Europe.
If they do, yeah. Gideon?
I think pragmatism historically has just served the Dutch well. The question is, do we need to change now, or do we stick to something that's worked so well in the past? Whether it was fighting water together, a necessity to work together and to cooperate, or in the 80s when another crisis hit us. You know, this whole idea of talking the people, the workers, the businesses and the governments, put them together and have them come to an accord. That worked out really well. And now the question is, do we need to have some such pragmatic approach again, something that some will coin the Polder 2.0, to mention kind of a hip way of putting it. I liked your question about the image. I mean, this is just one of the ideas I've had debates about. I actually wonder what you think about this, because the Dutch came from a stratified society, different pillars of belief, and everything was arranged on the top, and all that has fallen away. We have a change in values and all that, and it seems that The Hague is actually, I don't have the figures, but I would say that it is the most segregated, one of the most segregated places in the Netherlands. I moved from Amsterdam to The Hague, and the difference was stunning. I mean, really. And I think there is a general question of what is this closeness in society with neighbors, with neighborhoods, with communities, but also on a European level. One of my suggestions would be, why don't we reinstate the service, not military maybe, but some kind of social service as a solution for that, because maybe that's some way of getting society active again on a more communal level, right? Like you get a lot of benefits as a students, for example, so maybe students can give something back while giving something for education. An idea out there for a politician to think about. Some students over there maybe saying, no way, I'm not doing this, you know. So I think that would be an interesting thing on tolerance and pragmatism. I think in the end it's both, and one leads to the other. It's not so much tolerance in the Netherlands, it's more pragmatism that leads to tolerance. But does it matter? Is that a negative thing? I don't think so. But.
Yeah, I would like to close the debate by giving, maybe you would like to apply to this idea of Gideon, a young director of the Center of Innovation, and one of these innovations that he suggests, which is actually what innovation is. It is often recycling existing ideas in different forms, which is not a critique, because I actually support the idea. What do you think about this to revitalize let's say the younger part, so the future, the party of the future is here, of the Netherlands, to have a social service? Is that a good idea that would help alleviate the problem? You don't need to give a very long reply, but just
being based we abolished national service, I think, just before the year I was born, I think. So I think something like that could help, because it's a practical way. But one of the things which, because what I like, I think sport is a way, I think, to do it. I think one of the things which I've always found strange here in Netherlands is that you don't have, sport isn't big at schools. And also, one of the issues, as an expat, what I found as a problem is that sort of, you know, if you've got a child, you say, oh, which club are you going to join them in? Yeah? And the ballotage committees for clubs. So it wasn't over whether my daughter, my son was a good footballer, but it's whether me as a parent was a suitable person to join that club. And what I find, so for me, I find that sports here, instead of bringing people together, can be very divisive, because I'm sure if people live in The Hague, if you say you play for a certain club, they know what type of person you are, what type of income you are. And whereas in the UK, it tends to, people from different classes, different neighbourhoods, play in the same team. And I think that's one way of bringing people together. So that's one way I would think you could do it through sport. Making, you know, I'd say getting rid of, I would say, the snobbiness about being a member of the club, but just having teams based on the quality of the players.
Okay, I would like to thank the three speakers and the audience for raising points, asking questions, having a good conversation, an exchange of experiences, ideas, even proposals on the table for revitalizing our young Dutch society. Thanking the speakers, I would like to give them a little present, which is in the corner, so I'm going to get it. And the nice thing about this present is that it is inward looking, because you can actually see what is in it. But the content itself is then outward looking again. At least it's meant to stimulate it. One is one of our after Montesquieu Reeks special about the inheritance in Dutch, the erfenis. It's in Dutch, so that's another inburgeringscursus of Pim Fortuyn, the erfenis of Pim Fortuyn and what we do with it. And on the other side, which is still transparent, you can see an interesting wine which is produced on an estate that once was owned by the family of Montesquieu. So it's a Bordeaux wine from a wine estate originally owned by Montesquieu. Let me thank you, Billy, first for your role here tonight. And the same, again, thank you very much, Adriaan, for your contribution. And although we ended with the note to make the Netherlands more sporty, a bottle of wine, if you don't drink it in one time, is still, you know, affordable, I think. Gideon Shimshon, thanks to you.